Well, joining me to discuss that and the way the whole Brexit process is going are Wera Hobhouse, Liberal Democrat MP, member of the Brexit Select Committee. She voted Remain. And from the Conservatives, Theresa Villiers MP, Conservative MP, and of course a prominent Leave campaigner. Welcome to you both. Do you think David Cameron's right? Not as bad as you thought it was going to be?
I think it was obviously always a problem when people were predicting doom and gloom. But it is important to remember that David Cameron also says on his clip, it's a mistake. Why should we do something that is a mistake?
Well, if it's not going to harm you very much, what does it matter?
Well, I believe it will long-term be harmful. I also always have looked at Europe and the European Union in connection with the question that was raised earlier in your program about what is the European Union for. It was the biggest peace process that has ever been launched in history. The two biggest enemies over history, Germany and France, after two big world wars that were caused by the conflict between Germany and France, finally decided after the Second World War, enough is enough, no more wars. So that's what the European Union is for and still is for, and I believe very strongly in that.
Do you think it's significant that Mr Cameron is making these remarks now? Is this a sign that perhaps he thinks he got it wrong at the referendum?
David Cameron is a very sort of sincere and straight-talking individual, so it doesn't surprise me that he's acknowledging now that the predictions made by the Stronger In campaign haven't come to pass. That, you know, if you look at the economy, unemployment's at its lowest level for 40 years, manufacturing and exports are up, and we have, you know, the highest ever levels of people investing in this country from overseas, whereas the Remain campaign told the British electorate that there would be an immediate economic shock. That has not happened. It demonstrates that the fundamentals of our economy are strong and we can stand on our own 2 feet.
So there's been no economic shock?
First of all, I would say the pound dropped quite dramatically. That was obviously an indication of Brexit. And we continue to say that Brexit hasn't happened yet. So people in businesses are making preparations in the background, and I can say that from my own experience. We've got a small manufacturing business up in the northwest. We talk to a lot of our customers and our clients, and everybody is making preparations to, well, for the time being, they're seeing what's happening. But as and if the situation is going to get worse, then they have already contingency plans to move their production.
How do you explain the record levels of employment?
And that is a success story that nobody can deny. This is something that hopefully will continue. But if, for example, our production is going to move from this country over to the continent, and we are making preparations for that, then it will not look so good for employment.
I mean, the argument is being made that, you know, as we're just hearing, that we haven't left the European Union yet. There's also a lot of argument about how we're leaving the European Union. What do you understand this transition phase to be about? Because a lot of Europeans are saying, well, actually, that's when we'll do the negotiating about the final deal, whereas David Davis is saying, oh, well, we'll have the final deal ready by this autumn.
It looks as if the transition period will be very close to the status quo. It's obviously to be negotiated, and that, you know, in some ways I find that difficult. I'd like to see us sort of fully reasserting our independence at an early stage, but I recognise that
you think it will be a vassal state, as Jacob Rees-Mogg suggested?
I wouldn't put it like that. The key, for me, the key decision is what happens at the end of that transition period. If we end up sort of retaining the sort of obligations, many of the obligations of membership up until the end of that transition period, I think that's, you know, something that we can accept in terms of giving businesses time to prepare. I can understand the argument that said if you have a shift in the rules for a transition period and then a shift in the rules at the end of a transition period, that does make things more complicated.
Does that mean you've got to know those answers by this autumn for what it's going to be like after the transition?
Well, you've hit on a really important point. How much of the deal has to be agreed by the time we start the transition period? I would obviously like as much as possible of that to be agreed. We need to know, you know, the outline at least of where we're going to end up when we at the end of the transition period when we go into it.
What do you think?
I think the interesting thing is that even the European Union has actually shifted its position. Originally, I understood from European officials that we visited in Brussels that actually everything had to be agreed before we started the transition period, we needed to know where the end point was in order to transition. They have now shifted their position and also understand that actually in that short period of time left, we can't have agreed anything. We can have agreed the very broad outlines at the very most, and that should worry us all.
I don't know if you saw Faisal Islam's report earlier on, but what he was suggesting was that on your side of the Conservative Party, if I can put it that way, there's now some disquiet about the way these negotiations are going, and that pro-Brexit MPs may try and amend the withdrawal bill so that Mrs May can't enter into a customs union. Would you find yourself being one of those rebels?
I think you're right. There is some anxiety about the direction in which the negotiations are going. I mean, I've always argued strongly that we need to be prepared to make compromises to ensure that the result of the referendum is implemented, but in a way which also takes into account the views of Remain voters as well as Leave voters. But you know, there are only so many compromises you make which are consistent with respecting the result.
And a customs union would be a compromise too far, in your view?
Yes, it would. We need to leave the customs union if we're going to respect the result.
And you can't have a
referendum.
customs union afterwards, effectively the same thing from the outside.
Some kind of customs arrangement or customs partnership it can be considered, but not membership of the customs union.
Which always brings me to the point of why don't we actually ask the people again? Everybody argues the will of the people. The will of the people was a decision in 2016 to leave the European Union. The next decision is what is actually the result of that. And this is why I keep saying the people must finish what the people have started. Why don't we go back to the people and ask them? But that seems to be the last thing that the government wants to do.
You want to be careful what you wish for. We don't know how referendums are going to end up. Thank you.
If we do referendums properly and inform people properly, I was a member of the Electoral Reform Society, how to do referenda properly, informing people properly, then I trust people to make good decisions.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. This is All Out Politics. Coming up next...